All right, so let's get right to it. We'll talk about sex. You cannot navigate the dating world with having to define your position on who to have sex with. So let me just sum up some common views, okay? This isn't gonna be new information, but maybe this describes how you think about it. The first common assumption is that sex is for mature people, and as long as it's two consenting adults, and what's wrong with having sex? The second assumption is, well, it's irresponsible to get married unless you first had sex and lived together, because after all, you wouldn't buy a car without test driving it first. So you gotta make sure you're sexually compatible before you get married. Besides, if the sex isn't great, it means you maybe hadn't found the right person. If it is great, well, you have found the right person, at least until they're not the right person, at which point the sex isn't so great anymore, right? And then you go looking for the next person. That's kind of how that works. And that reasoning sounds logical and responsible, and it makes perfect sense if, and this is a big if sex is only physical. But is sex just physical? In other words, is it a physical act that you engage in and then when it's done, it's just left in the past, that there are no effects that follow you? Well, I actually don't think you believe that's true, and here's why. If sex is just physical, then it wouldn't create any pain or turmoil or regret that it so often creates. If sex was just physical, there wouldn't be so much strong emotional response around it, would there? If sex was just physical, then people ought to be able to shake off a sexual experience they regret like they shake off getting a speeding ticket or racking up too much credit card debt. But I don't think I have to convince you that's not how it works. It's way more than just physical. Now, you may have never considered this, but according to Scripture, God created sex. I'll let that idea sink in for a minute. God created sex, and He created it to serve three purposes. Pleasure, we all get that. Procreation, that one's obvious too. But it's this third purpose that nobody ever seems to explain to us. It's the one that makes sex way more than just physical. Scripture teaches He created sex to be a promise. Don't believe me? Well, let's just talk science. Research has shown that when a person engages in a sexual experience with someone, their body actually makes a promise whether they want to or not. Biologically, your body is wired to automatically bond to another person emotionally when you engage in any form of sexual activity. And you literally cannot keep this from happening in your brain. Now, here's what that tells you. It tells you that sex was designed to be a pathway to intimacy. Intimacy is the ability to know and be fully known. Intimacy is just the idea of, okay, I'm giving all of me to all of you exclusively forever. That is the promise that researchers have found your brain automatically makes to the other person when you engage in sexual activity with them. That means there is a connection between your sexuality, your sexual behavior, and your soul. Now, here's why this is important. Here's the warning. That connection, your ability to bond intimately with another person through sex, well, that can be damaged. That's what scientists have found. When you engage in sex outside of the context of a committed, exclusive marriage relationship, then you damage your ability to experience the very intimacy that sex was designed to deliver and the kind of intimacy that we almost crave. So, if all that's true and you were God, then what would you tell you about sex? I actually don't think you would say then, oh, sex is for mature people, No, you might say, no, sex is for married people. You wouldn't say, check to see if you're sexually compatible before you make this irrevocable commitment in marriage. No, you'd say, hey, commit yourself fully in marriage, and then sex is going to give you the intimacy that you desire. Treat it like it's valuable. Guard it like it's worth something. Protect it until you marry the man or the woman that you're going to commit to for life. So, you've heard this before, that you should refrain from sexual activity outside of marriage, but it's not because you're trying to avoid STDs or you're trying to keep from having a baby that you aren't ready to take care of. God says, hey, you ought to flee sex outside of marriage because when you engage in it, you hurt yourself. Your sexuality is impacting way more than your body. It impacts your soul and diminishes your ability to experience what you want most and what you need most, which is going to be relational intimacy with the one that you have committed to for life through marriage. So, if you give me permission to challenge you for just a second, if you're single, I want to challenge you to guard your sexuality, whatever it takes. If you've been waiting against all odds, you feel like you're the only person who's waiting to have sex until you're married, well, you're not the only person. And I know it's hard to make that choice, but it really is worth it. So don't give up. Now, if you're currently in a relationship where you are sexually active, would you consider stopping that sexual activity? Which I know sounds really extreme, but just think about it. Every time you engage in sex, you are trading intimacy tomorrow for pleasure today. You're creating future intimacy problems for yourself. And I don't think you want to keep hurting yourself. And the reality is, if he doesn't love you or she won't stay with you without sexual activity, you may not have much of a relationship anyway, at least not one that's going to help you stay in love, happy together forever. You certainly don't have a relationship that's worth marriage. And for those of you who are living together, okay, I get that. Just, would you be honest with yourself? You're actually not doing that to practice having a better marriage one day. No, you're making your future marriage relationship a little more difficult. So maybe you should stop this sexual activity and just move out, kind of reset until you get married. I know it costs you money and it's inconvenient. I know it's not practical. I've heard all of that. But I think the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want romance and intimacy to be stronger when you're married, or do you just want sexual activity now? It's your call. But if you really do love each other, go ahead and get married, right? Make the actual commitment to exclusivity with that person, and then when you have sex with them, your brain won't be making a promise that your body's not keeping. You won't be lying to them. If you think I'm crazy, right, you got no intention of changing any of your sexual habits, again, that's your call. I'm not going to tell you what to do, and I'm certainly not going to care about you any less, and neither does God for that matter. He's going to love you just as much. But just do me a favor. Hold on to what I've shared with you, because one day you're going to get married and you and your spouse may just struggle with intimacy, and you're not going to be able to figure out why. You're going to think, maybe I just need to find the next right person. Maybe I didn't actually marry who I was supposed to marry. But when you think that, I want you to remember, no, that's not it. I remember what I heard that day. I'm going to need to work through the consequences of past sexual choices, because that's what's creating the problem. And then one final thing. Listen, if you've been active, or maybe you are active sexually as a single adult, and you feel hopeless, or you feel discouraged, or you feel guilty or ashamed because of some of the choices you've made, if you're thinking, well, I've already blown it, there's not any hope, I've got some really good news for you. You are wrong about that. It is not too late for you. There is definitely hope, because you get to decide today how you want to write your story tomorrow. You can't change the past, but you can change the future. You get to decide what story you want to tell 3 years from now. And you can choose to start following God's plan for your sexual activity today. And He promises that His grace will heal you and prepare you to be able to experience romance and intimacy exclusively with your future marriage partner. In other words, you can decide to change your habits, and you can practice and prepare to stay in love, happy together forever from this point forward. That can be your story if you choose for it to be. So just ask yourself, okay, what story do you want to tell? Which person do you want to be? Now, if you want to dig deeper into this, we've got a series on our YouTube channel called Love, Dates, and Heartbreaks that you might find really helpful. I just want to encourage you to commit now to become the kind of person who can actually keep your commitments later. Become the kind of person that the person you're looking for will be looking for. You will be glad you prepared and did.